Thanks.
A little further down the road, blocking the road. So they have cars, you know,
Yeah.
this way, this that way. So what took me 2 seconds to go down this road,
Oh, did they?
40 minutes. And I was like, phew. Yeah.
Texted her. Will you call her? If you wouldn't mind, call her.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's 5:08. I apologize for the late start. We've got a member who's running late, and I think somebody may have gone to the wrong location. We think they're on their way, but we did have a location change for the meeting. So I'm Eric Remington. I'm chairman of the Retirement Commission. Thank you, everybody, for being here. First on our agenda tonight is we have our financial advisors here from GYL Financial Synergies. We meet quarterly, and one of the things we do every quarter is we review the portfolio performance of the assets in the plan. So that's why Michael and Claire are here tonight to go over that. So I'd like to have them do their presentation, and then we can have them leave, and we can go on to the rest of the agenda for the meeting. And so we have public input on the agenda. If there's anybody that has public input related to anything that's not on the agenda or Michael and Claire's presentation, I'd invite that now, and then we'll do public input after their presentation for anybody that wants to talk about the matter related to the grievance, if that's okay. So seeing nobody at the moment. Yes. What's that?
Is it public input?
Well, if
it's regarding my grievance. So.
No, we'll have an opportunity for you to speak after their presentation. So. Okay. All right. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael and Claire.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, all. Thank you.
You might want to speak
Yeah,
into the
could you
microphone.
speak?
Oh, I'm
Being
sorry.
recorded.
Okay.
Thank you.
That good? Can everyone? Okay, yeah, I can hear myself now. Great. I apologize. I'm getting over a little bit of a cold if my voice sounds a little hoarse. But so we will start by doing a brief overview of the capital markets and the economy, as we generally do, and then dig into performance. As typical, we develop an acronym each quarter, and this quarter's there's a lot going on, so it's a little bit hokey, but it's memorable. It's the gift of beer, and starting with the G in our acronym for GDP. Global GDP growth is slowing, however, is still positive. A couple of exceptions. We've seen negative growth in Germany, but the trend is still towards positive economic growth, albeit at a slower pace than we have seen for the past couple of years. The I in the acronym is short for interest rates. The Fed, after its third cut, recently announced that it has officially paused, and so that's kind of this interim adjustment, as the Fed termed it, to interest rates, at least for the time being, has been put on hold, and we anticipate that interest rates, although we have seen a good amount of volatility over the past year, a lot of it driven by speculation in the markets as to what the Fed's going to do, the overall environment, we anticipate will be relatively calm. The F, of course, in our acronym is for the Fed, and so we talked about that a little bit in the context of interest rates. And then lastly, the T in the first part of our acronym is for trade. Seemingly not a day goes by when we don't hear some talk of trade hitting the headlines, but it looks as if what's being deemed phase one of an agreement with the Chinese is imminent. We have deals have been signed previously with the Japanese and the South Koreans, and we still have this lingering reiteration of or revision of NAFTA that has yet to be formally ratified by the legislature. But the trade environment seems to have have calmed a bit at least, although this will likely continue to ebb and flow. And I think the lesson from it is, of course, that despite what expectations were about a year or so ago, that somehow the White House and the Chinese government are sort of going to show up at CNBC one morning with a nice gift wrap box with a trade agreement in it, is not, of course, going to come to pass. And this will be kind of an ongoing negotiation and a bit of a political football. For the second part of our acronym, excuse me, the B stands for Brexit. We joked a couple of quarters ago after at that time the latest extension that Brexit had officially become a horror show with an October 31st revised deadline. That, of course, has been pushed again out to January. There will be, it looks like there's going to be, or I think it's actually scheduled, another election in the UK, and we'll see if Boris Johnson is one of, if not the shortest serving prime ministers in the UK. But continued news will come on that from our friends across the pond, who seem to be in a race with the US for dysfunctional political environments at the national level. But Brexit is, as it kind of lingers on and on, it's sort of becoming less and less of an issue and a concern, at least for the global economy, and more of a uniquely British issue. Claire's always, my colleague from Scotland, is always correcting me when I misuse the difference between England and Britain and the UK. The first E is for earnings and employment. Corporate earnings continue to move in a positive direction. There was a lot of fear that we'd see earnings contraction in this quarter, and that hasn't come to pass. In fact, the majority of corporate earnings have actually exceeded expectations, albeit somewhat tempered expectations. But corporations and corporate earnings continue to be moving in a positive direction, while unemployment remains at or near historic lows. Essentially, the unemployment rate, the headline rate, is the lowest it's been since President Johnson was in office, and arguably more importantly, the broader measure of unemployment, what they term the U6 number, which includes those who are underemployed or those who have essentially given up looking for work, that number is back down to numbers not seen since the early part of this century. So it's an indicator that we're starting to see sort of a broader participation in the economic recovery. One of the criticisms of the economic recovery has long been that if you're in a part of the economy that's doing well, good for you, but the overall economy is not performing really on par, and we're starting to see that expand, and that's kind of borne out in continued strong numbers in consumer confidence. The second E is for the elections. I don't think we need to talk about those too much, except to say that we are at the kind of at the height of silly season, and we're seeing more and more out of potential candidates, and much as we typically see during an election cycle prior to the primary season. Essentially, we're seeing kind of the more shall we say, extreme policy ideas, really from both sides of the aisle, because that's, it's typically the way primaries go, is that you tend to get voters with more radical views, either toward the left or to the right, participating. And I think it's important to note that although very much of the language in the press is such that kind of an idea comes out and it's as good as becoming policy. Ultimately, right now we're just sort of hearing all sorts of different ideas, and ultimately the presidential candidate, at least typically, maybe 2016 was an exception, but typically the things that are put forth by the candidate are different than that which is put forth by those during primary season. But certainly stay tuned for ongoing volatility in the markets as a result of the election that's just under a year away now. And then lastly, and this really gets to the presidential election, is redistribution. There's a lot of talk about redistribution of wealth, particularly amongst candidate Elizabeth Warren and candidate Bernie Sanders. So again, I think it remains to be seen exactly what kind of traction those policies get with the broader or those potential policies get with the broader public. But again, I think in general, we are seeing that the overall economic picture remains reasonably solid. The consumer is healthier really than arguably they've ever been with home prices, at least nationwide. Maybe we wouldn't see it here, and we don't see it here in Connecticut, but nationwide home prices have recovered. Of course, retirement plan balances are at or near all-time highs, and with unemployment near all-time lows, that bodes well for consumer confidence, and with consumers making up about 70% of our economy, that overall continues to paint a reasonably positive economic picture. So we're constructive on equities going forward, essentially neutral on fixed income, although we do anticipate, especially as election season really kicks into high gear, that we do anticipate continued volatility in the capital markets. So with that, I'll pause. Unless there are any questions, I'll turn it over to Claire to review the performance of the portfolio. Okay.
Okay. So apologies to everybody who won't have a book in front of them, and so you'll be flying blind a wee bit. So we'll do our usual sort of 30,000-foot view, start on page 18. We'll sort of do a summary of our cash flows and returns since inception. And we start off in the table looking at the top right-hand corner. We've got about 5.25 years under our belts now, which has gone by really quickly. And looking at our return back to inception, the plan is up 5.9%, and that compares with our tailored benchmark. Had we indexed everything, we would have had a return of 5.3%. So we've got a little cushion of outperformance, which we're carrying over the shorter term, and we'll look at that in just a moment. If we look at the volatility in achieving that return, our policy benchmark has a volatility of 1. And going back to inception, our pension plan, the volatility achieving our slight outperformance is also 1. So if had the return, that number been over 1, we'd have slightly more volatility. If we were under 1, we'd have taken a little less risk or volatility in achieving that long-term result. The other number we look at is alpha. And alpha says what value has been added since inception. So we're looking for positive numbers here, and our alpha is 0.05. So it's pretty small, and alphas tend to be a small number in general, but we're on the right side of the tracks. So it says for the return that you achieved, it was slightly above expectations given the level of volatility over that 5.75 time frame. So far so good on that one. And then looking at it in terms of dollars, back in April of 2014, we started with $26.4 million. Over that time, if you ignore the overall contributions and withdrawals, every time we do with rebalancing, those numbers get bulked up. So the number we focus on is we've had a net cash flow withdrawal of nearly $1.1 million overall since that time frame. So the growth in the pension plan has come from realized and unrealized gains plus interest and income, and that's to the tune of $9.4 million. If we look at going to date, our valuation as of yesterday, we just crept over $35 million. We have had withdrawals since the end of September, so we're ahead over $500,000 just since the end of September. So drilling down into a little bit more detail, if you could turn back to page 16. Looking at our overall asset allocation, we've sort of consistently been at 65% in equities and 35% in fixed income. And we're diversified across, on the domestic side, we have international, we have a portion in real estate and a portion in alternative investments. And within our fixed income investments, the bulk of it is in high quality domestic fixed income, and we have a portion in emerging market debt, very small, it's only 2%, and 4% in high yield. So we're pretty diversified across that asset class. Looking at our returns, third quarter was more challenging. I think Michael ran through some of the issues. The trade issues certainly playing a large part of it, and they also have a big impact on the international market. So we saw, on the whole, the domestic equities kept their head above water, although looking at the small cap value side, that was a more challenged part. International markets and emerging markets moved into negative territory. It was a more challenging time for them, and also for emerging market debt. And that'll sort of play into some of the returns that we're seeing. We also saw a really big spread. If we look for 2019, the spread in the sector returns was really noticeable. You had technology and real estate were the dominant sectors. They were up over 30% through September, and we had energy and healthcare were only at 6%, so a big spread there. Again, that sort of plays some part in the returns that we saw achieved. So for that third quarter, we actually had a pretty decent return in what was a lackluster 3 months. The benchmark was up 0.2% and we were up 0.6%. And that outperformance actually carries across all the time frames. Year to date, we're up for that 9-month time frame at 13.6%. So a nice cushion there with the index on 12.3. And then for the 1 year number, just edging over 4%. 3 years, we're at 7.3%. And 5 years, we're at 6.2, with a benchmark on 5.6. And then we mentioned earlier the return to inception, 5.9 versus 5.3. So on the whole, pretty good results. Hopefully we'll keep that outperformance going. Now, not every portfolio, not all of our ducks were lined up, but on the whole, we had pretty good results. One of our strong performers was the JP Morgan Equity Index. This is our large cap value. And I think as we've seen at the last several meetings, this one really has outperformed when the markets were rough that fourth quarter. 2014, it provided us some good protection, and it's also performed very well as the markets had some really great returns earlier in the year. So this one is performing well across all time frames. We're indexing 10% with the S&P 500, just because that's a tough index to beat. So we're sort of getting our best bang for our buck, if you like, paying very low expenses and getting strong returns there. So that fund was up year to date 20%. It's up 25% now. So the month of October into November, we saw some really strong returns coming through, actually really across the board. T. Rowe Price is our large growth. This fund, we'd had excellent returns up through 2018. We saw really nice outperformance. 2019 has been a tough year for them, and they've pretty much given up their outperformance. So now we're seeing, especially over the short term, they've dropped behind the index, and the underperformance is fairly small across the longer time frames, but we do see it there. Part of it is they do have about 12% in non-US securities, so that in 2019 was a headwind for them. We actually had a conference call with their portfolio team today, and they have a few positions which did hurt them. They're underweight in Apple, which hurt. Their biggest position is Amazon, and Amazon sort of has been a little bit of a roller coaster. So there was a few positions that did hurt them, and they were overweight in healthcare, which, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the lesser performing sectors. We're also indexing a portion of our mid-cap exposure, also with Vanguard on that one. Our new manager is Times Square. They're in the mid-growth space. We've only had them for a couple of months. August was a really tough month. It's pretty much when the market hit a downturn. So we have a very short time frame. They're down 0.9%, but their index was down 2.9. So relatively speaking, sort of cold comfort. They dropped considerably less in that 2 month time frame. Gabelli, the undiscovered manager, is also a newer position for us. They've been on board for just under a year. Going back to inception, they're in line with the benchmark. As I mentioned, small cap value has been a sort of very challenged area, and so for the year to date, they were ahead. So you can see they were up nearly 15%. Actually, they're now up 21%. But going back to inception, they're sort of matching the index. But it's, as I said, the challenged area. Gabelli, they're the short-term numbers, they are pulling ahead. This was, again, cold comfort in the third quarter. They did much better in that negative environment that we saw in the index. The index was down negative 2.4. They dropped by 0.4. So it was challenging. Looking internationally, MFS is our international value side. They're doing a good job, noticeably outperforming across all time frames. Oppenheimer is our growth side. They had a good result year to date. They were up nearly 15% compared to 11.5% for the index. They're now up 22%. The longer-term numbers, 2018, I think we talked about this in previous meetings, they were challenged by, part of it had to do with currency play. The US dollar has had a big impact on international securities, and that did have an impact on their returns. And also just some of the positions. They had one of their themes is the electronification of cars. And so some of the trade issues that we've seen that sort of had a down impact on that sector of the market, and semiconductors last year was a tough point for them too. Then we're in international, we have a small cap advisor. It's only a 2% allocation. Going back to, they've been on board for 9 months. They're slightly ahead for that 9-month time period, but fell short in the third quarter. But this is a very short time frame for them. We also have an emerging markets allocation. We have Delaware here, and Delaware has outperformed its benchmark across all time frames. Cohen and Steers, this is our real estate component. This has been a fabulous part. They're up 30% year to date. We're not going to see that kind of return ongoing, but we'll bank it and say thank you very much. We'll take those gains that it's given us and add them to our bottom line. Certainly the lowered interest rates have been a boon to that part of the market. It's also one of the reasons, apart from being a good diversifier, its yield income stream has been very beneficial, and sort of as part of the reason that we like having this in here. Turning on the page, moving, Miller Howard is it's a master limited partnership, so it's tied in with it's obviously in the energy sector, but it's really more focused on the pipelines getting the oil and gas to all the places that are using it. There should be a disconnect between the price of energy, the price of oil, and the MLPs, but at times it does come together, and the third quarter was a tough one for the energy market, and it's sort of like the dropping tide pulled all the ships down. So Miller Howard has navigated very well and outperformed its benchmark across all the time frames we've had it there for. But in the last 2 years that we've had this position, it's been very challenging in this sector. So year to date, it's certainly added value. We're up 12%, but obviously when we look at the 1-year number, it's notably ahead of its benchmark, but we're still in negative territory. This is an area we're sort of looking at. We think long term, the MLPs are beneficial, but we're looking at the shorter term because there's this disconnect with energy has not taken place, and the results are getting pulled down, and we see this market continuing to be very volatile. We're just going to be looking at how do we feel about this sector of the market, and we'll come to you next quarter with just a view on sort of the broader picture of this area. And then moving into fixed income, as I mentioned before, we have some emerging markets and some high yield, and they're fairly small allocations overall. So what we're looking to do is our foundation fixed income piece is high quality. So with the emerging markets and the high yield, we're really just looking to pull some more blood out of the stone here, and hopefully do so with a little less risk. And certainly these areas over time have achieved higher rates of return than our domestic fixed income market has produced. MFS emerging markets, it's has pretty much sort of tracked alongside the index. In the third quarter, it did underperform somewhat due to its weighting in Argentina. Obviously, there's been a lot of news coming out of there, and so that did impact them. And they've been underweight in Mexico, which actually has continued to show some strength in their fixed income market. BlackRock is our high yield, and they're matching or exceeding their benchmark across all time frames. And then we look at Mesirow is our fixed income position, 25% in this domestic high quality, and again they match or exceed their benchmark in all time frames. I think one thing we found a little surprising was, given how anemic we found the fixed income market to be and sort of the yields that are sort of available, if we'd looked ahead, we wouldn't have expected an 8% return for 1 year to come out of this market. That's sort of the historic equity return. So for what has been an anemic area of the market, that 8% actually for the last year has been pretty beneficial. Michael, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's covered everything. So.
Any questions on?
Then you have an updated value?
Oh yes, well, I mentioned that earlier, the 35 million. Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
So as far as the valuation currently, is there any rebalancing that needs to occur at this point in time?
Our allocations are pretty close to the targets. We're getting slightly lower in our cash, but we have enough to get through at least 2 months of withdrawal. So there's no major rebalancing needing to take place.
I had a question in terms of the fixed income portfolio. The duration on the portfolio is running, I think it was 3.8 years. And if I'm not mistaken, the intermediate gov cred is closer
I
to
think it's
4.
low fours.
Yeah. And I guess the question is you know, being short has not helped us, although I think it's been our quality play that has helped us.
Yep.
Because we've been a little below the index on quality. I guess the question is, do you see us, first of all, I mean, as a pension, you know, I know we've had this conversation in the past about moving toward the ag and moving away from the intermediate gov. And I guess the question is when? And when should we start thinking about pushing this duration out, at least to neutral on the intermediate gov cred, and then over, you know, if rates start to back up someday, what would be our tipping point where we might start to push that out to 4.5-year duration, something like that, and move toward a 6-7-year duration ultimately?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. All of a sudden the microphone turned on. But Mesro being a total return manager is and they tend to be focused on capital preservation, so they've arguably been a little short, with the benefit of hindsight, a little shorter in duration than they otherwise could have been, certainly.
As was everybody else.
Right. So, but I think you know the point is well made that the duration of the liabilities of pension are quite a bit longer than that. So I think, you know, if we see that the shape of the yield curve normalizes a little bit more so than absolute rates, I think we can all probably agree that, you know, the lower rates are going to be here for the foreseeable future. But if we start to see the shape of the yield curve normalize a little bit when there is a decent pickup in yield by lengthening the duration, I think that would you know, arguably be a time to
Is
do
that
so.
something we have to direct Mesero, or do they do that themselves?
They will be making moves within the portfolio to a certain extent, but the portfolio being managed against the intermediate gov credit is a shorter duration index than, for instance, say the Barclays aggregate, which has a duration now I think it's north of 6, or it's in that vicinity.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit longer than the intermediate gov credit. So if we wanted to make a kind of a fundamental change and against which we're being benchmarked, that would be something that we need to instruct them to do.
Would you see us doing that in increments, almost like you take a sleeve of the portfolio and benchmark it to the ag, and then maybe do another sleeve later on? Because my concern is if we did a radical transition, then you're going to really screw up the portfolio.
It's sort of a two-edged sword because, you know, on one hand, let's just say, for the sake of argument, the duration of the pension is 10 years, or the liabilities of the pension is 10 years, which is probably a reasonably accurate guesstimate. You know, if we went out to that, say, in one fell swoop, that would be,
Cost
it would
us-
be great because it would match the liabilities. However, it would also at the same time subject you to a lot more price volatility. And even though the volatility would arguably be offset by the reduction in your liabilities in the event interest rates froze, you'd still have to kind of look at the decline in portfolio value, which is a psychological can be a psychological challenge.
Well, and
So
it
I think-
also can be a funding challenge.
Yeah, so I think certainly doing it incrementally would make some sense. But right now, with the yield curve as flat as it is, I have trouble kind of wrapping my head around the concept of, unless you're really
Extend.
well-funded enough to match most, if not all, the liabilities. I think let's wait till the shape of the yield curve normalizes a little bit before we make a move like that.
Anybody else?
Good.
Okay. All right.
Great number.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
My replacement. let Luke know too. Michael, there.
Okay, one thing I forgot to mention is we started the meeting, Kate Reitberg has been a member of the commission for a number of years now, and she submitted her resignation, I guess, last month. So we actually have a vacancy on the commission at the moment. But I'd like to thank Kate for her service. You know, she always had a great perspective on the plan. So hopefully we'll make sure the minutes reflect our thanks for her service. And Christine Davidson is the town treasurer. The town treasurer is a member of the retirement commission, and Christine chose not to seek re-election, and so this is her last meeting as a member of the commission as treasurer. And so I think her term actually ends next week.
Tuesday.
So thank you as well for your service.
12 years of service.
12 years as treasurer. Very nice, thank you. And Jack Henry is the incoming treasurer. Congratulations on your election. So although Christine is still the voting member of the commission, I asked Jack to be here tonight for continuity and to start to get him acclimated to the new role as treasurer and a member of the commission. So welcome, Jack. So we've got some formalities that I'd like to leave for the end of the meeting so that we can move on to I think the matter that most of you are here for, which is to hear the grievance from the police union. And I promise I'll leave plenty of time for public input. What I'd like to do is to have Bruce Barth, the town's attorney on this matter, present for the commission why we're here and what we're here to hear, and then I'd like to open it up to public comment.
Good evening, everyone. I was retained back in late 2017 to assist the town in trying to get to the bottom of the structure of their retirement plan. In particular, some of the issues that they've had and some of the questions they had. During that time, they provided me numerous boxes worth of documents, one of which appeared back in September, I believe, the last one we found. Fortunately, it didn't have anything major in there. And through that, I was able to create some timelines and understandings of what the town's retirement plans look like. So I just wanted to give you that by way of background. With respect to this issue, you have in your hands a timeline recreated of how the police retirement plan has evolved. And for purposes of this grievance, the issues at hand are twofold. One,
Excuse me, Bruce.
yes.
Yeah. It should be in your packet. We did print out the history, the timeline.
I guess that's yours. Are there any for the people in the audience?
I did not print out any extra copies.
Chris, no? Okay. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So as I said, there are two main issues that relate to this grievance and then one other, another sort of related issue. The two issues are the definitions of credited service and the definition of earnings. Just so everyone understands, there is an ordinance that has certain provisions in it. There is a collective bargaining agreement with the police that has certain other provisions in it. These two are not consistent at all. And in the case where generally a collective bargaining agreement will trump an ordinance in terms of how it should be interpreted. There are also ambiguous provisions both in the town ordinances and in the collective bargaining agreement. The one thing that's fairly clear is under the terms of the plan or the collective bargaining agreement and also under the terms of the ordinance, you only receive credit for service while you're receiving contributions and while you're receiving earnings and making contributions to the plan. So during periods when we are not receiving any earnings, you can't make any contributions and therefore you do not get any credited service. So that one thing is fairly clear. The collective bargaining agreement states, and by the way, I'm on page 7 of the timeline in terms of looking at documents. You make contributions with respect to earnings covered by the plan. Under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement, the language is fuzzy. And in particular, sorry, let me turn to the right page of the collective bargaining agreement since I want to cite it properly. It defines, uses the term annual earnings. And it's in page 19 of the collective bargaining agreement, which says annual earnings is a participant's annual compensation for service to the town and includes departmental overtime payments received from the town, but excludes outside duty commissions, bonuses, and this is what's most important, any other form of additional compensation received from the town. So I would take the position that any payments out of ordinary annual compensation, out of ordinary earnings, are not compensation, would fall under this exclusion at the end. In particular, any payments while someone is out on workers' compensation, most of those are not paid by the town in the first place, so there's no earnings during that time. And any compensation earned while someone is out due to workers' compensation, even though the town is paying, would not fall, in my view, as annual compensation. That could be interpreted either way.
So, Bruce, where are you in the collective bargaining agreement?
I'm on page 19 of the collective bargaining agreement section. It's 1.12 under Article 12, which is the whole retirement provision. So let me also refer to the ordinance, which refers to monthly earnings, and monthly earnings is defined as W-2 compensation. Compensation paid for workers' comp is excluded from W-2 compensation under the Internal Revenue Code. So workers' compensation payments, even if paid by the town, or payments for short-term disability, even if paid by the town, would not count as compensation for purposes of W-2 and therefore would be excluded. Whether that applies in this case is unclear, since the collective bargaining agreement refers to annual earnings, not monthly earnings. But that's still another unclear provision, shall we say. So the grievance talks about a period from 2007 to 2010. From October 31 of 2007 to, I believe, October 31, 2008, the town made payments to this individual.
What was the period?
October 31, 07 to October 31, 08. They made payments for that 1 year period. And from that, they withheld pension contributions. However, whether those payments were additional compensation received by the town or regular annual compensation is unclear. I would take their position it's other compensation, shouldn't count as service, shouldn't count as earnings, and therefore shouldn't count as service. However, the commission could interpret that either way.
So
for that period.
So for that period, they were paid by the town, he was paid by the town, and pension contributions were withheld.
That is my understanding.
And he was paid W-2 earnings?
Well, those amounts, I believe, were reported on W-2. Whether they should have been is another story. I would take the position they probably should not have been.
That's Debbie. Debbie, the finance director, is here.
So, but they were compensation was for disability, but it was paid on W-2. Okay.
So, under your ordinance, that would not count as compensation. Under the collective bargaining agreement, it's unclear. From the period of 08 to I don't know when in 10, I don't remember the date, there was no compensation paid. He received only workers' compensation payments paid outside of the plan, and not paid by the town, not paid by, paid by another party, your workers' compensation carrier. And no monies were withheld for contributions. So under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement and the ordinance, I would take the position that that is not credited service because there was no compensation and no contributions made during that time period.
Okay. So is that the period in question?
Well, the period in question is the whole 07 to 10 period. But that's bifurcated because two different things happened during
Right.
that period.
Okay.
And then
I'm sorry, can I just, I'm looking at the actual grievance, and the grievance is referencing 10/31/08 to 10/25/10. So is it 07, 08?
I think
Is it a
the
two-year
07 to
period?
08 period has to be looked at as well.
So that's only, so they're really dealing with a three-year.
Well, two periods,
period.
no, the 08 period, 10/31/08 to what period was that?
And this says, was out on workman's comp from 10/31/08 to 10/25/2010.
That's the second period.
That's the second
I said it
section.
was in 10, I just didn't remember the exact date it ended.
Okay, so we're dealing with 3 years.
You're dealing
1 year
basically with 3 years.
Us compensating, 2 years with workman's compensation.
1 year for the town paying, 2 years for.
Okay.
So the other point I wanted to make, because one of the issues is the authority of the commission to review this issue. If you look at the collective bargaining agreement, page 22, it's on the very end of Article 12 of the collective bargaining agreement. It says the retirement commission shall be responsible for administration of the pension plan. Any grievance or disputes with respect to the administration of benefits for police participants shall be processed through the grievance procedure in the police
I'm
collective
sorry,
bargaining.
Bruce, could you,
Page what?
where are you?
I'm on
Page
page
22
22,
of the
just
collective
before Article 13. Of the contract, I'm sorry,
Oh, okay.
which is the end of Article 12 of the contract.
Okay, yep.
So that language is fuzzy at best.
Can you read it again?
Yes, I will. The retirement commission shall be responsible for the administration of the pension plan, which, by the way, it is under the ordinances already. Then it says, any grievance or dispute with respect to the capital administration of capital B benefits for capital P police and capital P participants shall be processed through the grievance procedure in the police collective bargaining agreement. I have no idea what that means. If the retirement commission has the authority to determine the administration of the plan, how can any other party have any authority over the pension plan? And it's unclear what that means there. So I think this commission, in my view, the commission has the authority to decide this case. This is not a grievance item that should be going through the proper police procedures, because then this commission would have no authority over the decision, which doesn't make any sense if you're administering the pension plan.
So if that's the case, I mean, there's an employee that has a legitimate question about his pension benefits.
Right.
So is the proper procedure to come to us with that concern as opposed to a grievance?
That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
So that's my general comments on the grievance. Let me throw out one thing generally, and then we can talk further about it if you want to. The town has ordinances. The town has collective bargaining agreements. Town also has a plan, has plan documents. The one thing that was clear in our review is the 1997 plan document that was prepared by Hooker and Holcomb was never approved by the town. So that document governs nothing at this point in time. So the last plan would have been in the 1980s. So arguably you have multiple documents governing someone's pension. I would strongly recommend to the town that only one document or multiple documents, if you don't want to deal with collective bargaining agreements, treat them separately, have separate plans for each collective bargaining agreement, govern the plan, govern the benefits that someone gets under the pension. And I would recommend to accomplish that the ordinances be repealed in their entirety, that the provisions that are in the ordinance that are relevant be put in a plan document, that all collective bargaining agreements be reviewed and the provisions that are relevant be put in a plan document, and that at the end of the day, the town by ordinance approve the plan documents, and that governs someone's pension. So there's only one place to look. If the collective bargaining agreements are ever revised to change pension benefits, the plan documents are revised. And by the way, they're incredibly out of date, since there have been numerous federal law changes during that time that need to be incorporated in those documents.
Right. And I would agree with that, and Melissa and I have had conversations about that, but I think that's an issue beyond this evening's meeting.
One other question I have, does anybody here know if our pension plan has ever been audited? Because I know that our annual audit that we have, the pension plan is beyond the scope of that annual audit. And this pension has been in place since, what, 1982?
60-something.
60-something?
Oh, it goes way back, yeah.
60s. That's an extraordinary amount of time to never have had any checks and balances or a third party review this plan. And so that absolutely has to happen.
Right, okay. But that, I think,
yeah,
is
that is a
for a
later
discussion
thing.
beyond
Yep.
the issue at hand. Okay, so thank you for that introduction and summary, Bruce.
Can I, before we, because I have one or two
Oh,
questions
sure.
on the, where you read the Retirement Commission shall be responsible for administration, there's a lot of capital letters there.
Yes, there is.
Normally, when I read contracts, capital letters are defined terms, or reference of definition. Are these defined? I'm flipping through
No,
there. I can't
find any definition. I don't know why they're capitalized. You know, you also have in here, if you look at the retirement provisions in the collective bargaining agreement, cites or provisions that says, like, earnings is defined in section, it says 1.12 annual earnings. It says 1.05 average annual earnings. Those probably relate to some former plan document, which we haven't been able to match up. And we've looked at all the former plan documents. So there's a lot of inconsistencies here. And capitalized terms in here, I don't know if they have any meaning. They're clearly intended to have a meaning. And as a lawyer, I would capitalize terms and define them, but they're not defined anywhere in the collective bargaining agreement, nor are they defined anywhere in the pension ordinances or any plan document that I could find, at least those specific terms.
Okay.
Can I say one more thing? I think that I think our goal here today is to just, however we feel about this grievance, we're governed by these documents. We know that they're inconsistent. So I think at least my goal for being here tonight is to see, what do the documents say? If we don't like what they say with respect to this particular grievance, how do we settle this particular grievance? And then what do we do moving forward so that this never happens again? Because as you know, this issue has come up a year and a half ago. I'm sure that other issues, I know that other issues exist with respect to this pension. And our employees don't have confidence in the information that we're giving them. And we need to solve this once and for all. And that's what this is about. This is the first step in that. And so I think that should be how we approach this. And that's why I wanted to make sure that we got to this forum.
Right, okay. So, hi.
I'm Lisa Lazarick, the Town's Labor Council. I just wanted to add, based on your...
You want to get on the microphone?
Oh, sorry. I'll move on. Lisa Lazarick, the Town's Labor Council. The language that is in currently the collective bargaining agreement related to the grievance process was an issue that was awarded by an arbitration panel in 1986 with shedding no light. Normally, at least in modern times, the arbitrators typically add some discussion in an arbitration award as to why they're making the decisions they make. They didn't in this case. They just picked one language submission over the other with no discussion. So we really don't know what it means, what it was intended to mean, and how to make those two sentences coexist. So I just wanted to add that.
All right, thank you for that. So I'm sure people have questions, and I think we've got some things to talk about, but I promised I would open it up to public input, which I'm going to do. But I neglected to mention when we started this discussion that Ryan Burrell is a voting member of the commission. He's also a member of the police union. And Ryan, Melissa, and I have had a number of conversations regarding his participation in any potential conflicts, which I think we vetted, and we're comfortable that Ryan can participate in the debate tonight, and I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Ryan?
Sure. Pertaining to this grievance, we had discussed that I do not have any years to buy back. I do not have any workman's comp claims. So as far as a financial benefit to me, I don't see it. If we do get into a discussion for future, something that could financially or personally benefit me, I've agreed that I will certainly recuse myself. But in this case, with this grievance, I think it would be beneficial to have somebody in the law enforcement field here to be able to answer any questions on the law enforcement side.
Okay, so with that, I'll open it up to public comment. I think Chris has a microphone.
Hello, I'm Officer Reynolds. I'm the one this is affecting. Being that I'm not an attorney, I'd like to ask what the State of Connecticut Board of Mediation and Arbitration binding, isn't that binding? Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Yes. Well, it's pretty clear based on what you read. I don't, you didn't actually read the language to it, but this shouldn't even be with the Retirement Commission at all, based on the award. The town's best offer was, where is it? Hang on a second. Give me 1 second.
Take your time. I think it's probably this thing.
Going from 86.
I assume that's what
I have it right here.
I found it. I have it. All right. This is under issue number 12, dispute resolution. Union's last best offer was the Retirement Commission shall be responsible for the administration of the pension plan. Pretty straightforward. Any grievances or disputes with respect to the administration of the benefits for police participants shall be processed through the grievance procedure in the police collective bargaining agreement. That was the union's last best offer. Do we agree with that?
Yes, and that's
Okay,
the
thank
current
you.
contract
And then the
language.
town's last best offer was under 11.07. The Retirement Commission shall be responsible for the administration of the pension plan. In any action or proceeding involving the trust fund brought by employees or representatives to town, the Retirement Commission and the trustee shall be the necessary parties. Any final judgment in such action or proceeding which is not appealed shall be binding and conclusive on the parties as provided by law. The award was the union's last best offer as awarded. Now, to me, binding arbitration means it shouldn't even be in front of the Retirement Commission. As much as I respect you guys being here, it went through the grievance procedure, through the chief of police, then through the police commission, who voted, although you told them they couldn't, which is false based on this award. So, I would assume binding arbitration means the town is bound by that. I don't care if it's in 1986, 1886, or 2016.
Unless and until it's changed in negotiations.
And it was not changed in negotiation.
We are currently in negotiations with the
This
police
happened
union,
in the
and
past.
this issue
Okay.
is on the table.
Can we?
But it happened in the past. This is in the past. This is something that happened in the past. In the future, sure, try to negotiate that in. But I'll tell you right now, it isn't going to pass. And I'd like to know, when did this, when did it change? The workers' comp didn't account, because I know there was a meeting with you, Ms. Mack, chief of police, and I'm sorry, I'm a little upset because this affects me. Our union attorney, our union president. And you said it changed in 2014, and that, I would be grandfathered. So when did this change? That's addressed to you, Ms. Mack.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't understand what you're saying, that you would,
You were in a meeting, and I believe Mrs. Yemba was too, and it was discussed about this with the chief of police and our union president, and this was brought up when Peter Ozawicki thing was going on, and you said it changed in 2014, that anything before that, workers' comp-wise, counts, but now all of a sudden it doesn't. So when did that change?
I think all I can say at this point is that we have uncovered a lot of inconsistencies in the way we've administered this plan, in the documents that govern this plan. We're here to try to figure it out.
So I'm the scapegoat then.
No, I don't think so.
Because that's what it appears to be. And, you know, I'm trying to be calm, which I am. But to me, binding arbitration is binding arbitration. So somebody please explain to me why this is even here. It shouldn't be. It should have been resolved already. Does anybody have an answer for that?
Well, I would ask that if we put aside who had the authority to make the decision, if you talk about the
How can
decision.
you put that aside?
Well, but if you put it, hold on, just let me finish, okay, please. If you put aside the authority thing and look at the decision that was made by the police commission, I typically you would say in your response what section of the contract was violated, because obviously grievances can only be brought if there's a violation of the contract. Then it would say a remedy. What do we have to do to make you whole? There are a lot of different things that we could do in this case. The police commission didn't give us any guidance. And so even if we accepted their decision, it would have come to me and to the finance director and to HR, and we would have said, what do we do with this? Then I would have directly given it to this body here to say, do we allow a buyback? Or whatever, and it's clearly in your bailiwick to decide how we address that. So regardless of the path that we got here, we would have gotten here.
I disagree, because in that meeting, the motion was to accept the grievance and make me whole. And all of a sudden, miraculously, at the end of the meeting, a letter from, what's her name, Miss Lazarek over there, was that they weren't allowed to vote on it. And that was thrown out at the very end when, you know, everybody was willing to go for it except for two people. Then all of a sudden, they voted, well, I still won the grievance, but you're getting into semantics now is what you're doing. They voted to approve this grievance. Okay? I mean, I was hurt protecting every single one of you people. Okay? And I'm still hurting to this day, every day of my life. I could have retired back then probably, but I didn't because I wanted to serve the town of Suffield, and this is how I'm treated. It's wrong. You know it's wrong. You talk about fiscal responsibility, you're talking about, oh, who else is this going to affect? You didn't have a problem giving yourself a raise. Correct?
Well, I think we should stick to the issue at hand.
Okay, you're right. But my point is, you know this is wrong. It's very easy to fix. It shouldn't even be in front of this commission right now.
Did you hear the comments I said before? We are governed by governing instruments of this town.
And binding
tonight-
arbitration.
Excuse me, let me finish, please. We are governed by governing instruments of this town, several of them. We know they're inconsistent. Today, we're here to hear how those govern this issue right now. And then we are here to decide whether we are happy with the result of those documents and how we're going to settle this grievance. And the third item is what we're going to do moving forward. Now, when I met with you and other members of your police union to discuss this grievance, I made my personal view on this very clear to you, that I think that when you are hurt on the job serving the town of Suffield, you absolutely should get credited service. And I mentioned then, my personal opinion does not matter. That's what's gotten us into this mess, is that people have made decisions based on feelings and their personal opinions. So if we want to continue perpetuating poor governance practices, we can keep doing that. I want to address the documents to which we are bound so that they are doing the right thing for everyone, so that the town of Suffield employees can have confidence in the information that they're receiving from the town of Suffield every single year. That's what this is about. And so please don't assume that you know how I feel. I've told you. And we're going to get to that.
That's fine. You know, and I'm done because I'll just get upset, but it shouldn't even be here. Just can one attorney here tell me what is binding arbitration? What does that mean? Somebody tell me.
You're angry, and I'm not going to respond.
I'm not angry. I'm upset. There's a difference between angry and upset.
The language resulting from the arbitration award, binding arbitration, that is in the collective bargaining agreement, which is the language that is governing in the collective bargaining agreement, is inconsistent and inconclusive. It is difficult for us to know how to reconcile those two statements in that provision consistently with each other. That's all I have to say on the matter.
That's your opinion. It doesn't, I mean, it's binding arbitration. It's very clear. It doesn't belong here. It's already been settled.
I'm not going to argue with you in
I'm
this
not arguing
forum.
with you. I'm just trying to make a point that I don't
I've said-
understand.
I've said-
I just don't understand where you're getting your ideas from. It's just,
Okay, is there other public comment? Okay. So I think, why don't we open it up to questions that people may have at this point on the commission? Christine, do you have any questions?
Is what we're really looking at, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that we have years of service that have been credited in our books, regardless of whether it was correct or not, but not necessarily all of them have had contributions.
I would ask the finance director to answer these questions. Deb, you're part of this commission, you should be at the table and participating. Aren't you? No?
No.
No? Okay, well, you're advisory. You're the one who administers all this. None of us really have any idea how this has been done.
Excuse me. I sent a memo when I was looking at the statements when they were going out in August, and noticed that there was, the way that the calculation is done on the statement is based upon the the last year that we input the time in. And I noticed that there was 0 salary for one of the years, and so I looked back and noticed that there was time that was not, pension contributions were not made. So when I sent the memo, I reduced the years of service to 15.77 years of service because of the time that there was no pension contributions made.
This was a memo to who?
This was a memo to Jeff Reynolds.
And is this an annual memo that goes out?
It's an annual statement that goes out, and I noticed this year that the statement was incorrect.
Okay. Was it different, or this is a mistake that had carried forward since
This was a mistake that
2010?
had carried forward.
Okay, and it
Since
just came to our
2007.
attention
Yes.
this year?
And it was, you noticed it for 1 year or 2 years? Because we're talking about a 2-year time.
No, the
Well,
two-
we're talking
well,
about 3 years, 1 year where we have him making contributions, but we're doing the deferred comp, and then we have 2 years where he's taking deferred comp, and we're not making any payments. So it would have been 2 years of contributions, is that right?
It would have been from the time frame of 10/31/2008 through 10/25/2010.
2 years.
So 2 years.
Yes,
And so you took 2 years off his service
yes.
when you made this restatement. In prior years, how many years did he receive notice that showed him having those years?
Since 2009.
2009. So even a year
Even a year during it.
during the period.
Yes.
So do we know if there are other situations like this?
We don't know for certain.
Because I guess for it to say 0, you would have to be, somebody would have to be out for the entire year.
Correct.
So that's why it would pop out. Okay.
Yes.
Was that a calendar year or fiscal?
Fiscal year.
So you're saying there could be other situations because unless they were out an entire year, it wouldn't be 0, so perhaps it would be reflected as a lower amount.
Correct.
But more,
And that would explain why maybe in '09,
Yes.
because it's a 10/31 and we have a June 30 year end.
Correct.
Yes.
So it creates
Fiscal
that
year
stub.
09.
It's a stub year of payment.
Yes.
Okay.
that's why.
Do you have any
Now, if
questions?
someone is out less than a year, where it doesn't go, like, say, to workman's comp, where, like, we're paying, do we have other situations where we're paying and it never went to, like, a period where someone else was paying and no contributions were made. It seems to me that we were taking contributions when we paid and not when.
Correct,
whenever.
because those payments were made directly from the insurance company.
Why did our process change? Why did we pay directly and then the insurance company? What changed?
I think it's because of the year, after a year, it goes.
The time
the
period
time-
then.
I believe it was the time period.
Okay.
So short-term is paid by the town and then long,
It's workers' comp.
Workers'
Workers'
comp is
comp, oh,
different
sorry.
than short-term and long-term.
oh, okay. So Bruce mentioned that the early part of the workers' comp period was paid on a W-2.
Correct. It was processed
Just
as
like
regular
pay.
payroll.
And
Pay-
why did that change?
After a year of service, I believe it then.
Went
we
to
were
the
told-
workers'
we-
comp- the
I believe
carrier?
we were told to terminate, and it was coming from the workers' comp carrier directly.
Is that, did we have some kind of stop loss, or is that the idea?
I have no idea.
It wouldn't be, I guess the workers' compensation takes over after a year, it would be my guess. You know, I'm just
That's
guessing.
just standard.
But that'd be, well, normally workers' compensation takes over a lot sooner, but in this case, workers' compensation takes over after a year, and all of those payments come from the workers' compensation carrier, not you, not the town, so the town pays zero at that point.
I see.
So was this a unique situation, or is that the way we handle all workers' comp payments for the first year?
I don't know that we've had many of this length.
But if it's only a week, I mean, how does that work? Are they W-2 earnings?
No, that change was made in 2014, so it is not.
Okay. So now, since 2014.
Correct.
Then everything just goes right to workman's comp.
Correct.
All right, so that the town
And
is not involved
contributions
in.
are not,
No contributions, all paid by workman's comp.
correct.
So again, why did that change happen in 2014? What changed in our practices?
Our HR director made a change at the time.
For what reason?
Don't know.
I don't know.
I don't believe any unions were notified of that change in 2014.
If I may jump in here, I believe that how the town was doing it prior to 2014 was taking the workers' compensation payments and paying itself back, paying directly W-2 wages during the period of disability that workers' comp payments were applicable, but taking the workers' comp payments in to replace the fact that we were paying out.
You mean we were receiving money from,
The
The
workers'
carrier.
comp carrier,
but we were making a payroll payment?
correct.
And, wow.
Is that
And-
right?
No,
That's not the way.
Doesn't sound
that's not the way it should be done, and I am guessing that that was what the change was in 2014.
From the research that I've done, it appears that check from the insurance company was signed in Officer Reynolds' case. He signed it over to the town so that the
Yes.
town could then issue him a town check. I think under the assumption that contributions were going to be pulled out of that insurance check before it came to him.
So prior to 2014, we were not doing it properly, now we are? Is what we're doing now the best practice?
I believe as long as we're not getting any workers' comp checks to the town. The workers' comp checks are going directly to the individual who's injured.
And in those circumstances, can the individual make a contribution to the pension?
No, because as Attorney Barth had pointed out, because they're not getting W-2 wages, no contributions are being withdrawn.
Were we, prior to 2014, in these circumstances? It sounds like we were
I believe
giving
so,
credited
because,
service, and we were
Yes.
making
Because it
contributions.
was flowing through the town?
because it was, yes,
Going
the
through payroll.
insurance checks were being signed over to the town, but the town was paying the officers' wages while out on workers' comp injury.
And picking up on your comment, was this change ever communicated to the unions and to the town employees who were in the pension plan? Because it really would affect their years of service and.
Agreed. And that I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
And so when we were doing, prior to 2014, we were doing it because we were just treating it as regular payroll, not because we were complying with any collective bargaining agreement or with the pension ordinance. It was just how we've done it, and that's what we did.
Right or wrong?
Right or wrong, that's what we did.
Yeah.
And so that they were getting paid timely instead of having to wait.
Well, but
Was part of it.
Getting paid timely.
Oh, so
How does
we
that
were,
mean?
we were actually paying prior to the insurance checks come in, so the
Correct.
checks
Okay.
were signed over afterwards.
Correct.
Okay, so that's
Okay,
good. At least
that's
there was a
why
reason.
they were doing it.
Continuity
the
of them
practice.
receiving payroll checks.
Whether the practice was correct or not, that was the,
That was the
time
rationale.
frame.
So we were helping with cash flow for the individual.
Okay.
while they sit in that.
And there must be other benefits as well that
Yeah.
can be continued under the W-2 earnings as opposed to being paid workers' comp, like medical premiums and things like that, right?
Karen, did you have something?
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to add, is this on?
Karen Ziemba is our Human Resources
I
Director.
joined the town in July of 2016, and we had an issue in 17 when it first came to my attention. We had an employee that went out on workers' compensation, so we did immediately put him, his wages to be paid through the insurance company. There was a challenge of whether those wages would be pensionable, and this is when it came to my attention that it had stopped in 2014. So I did an audit to determine if anybody from 2014 forward had received credit for workers' compensation for the pension, and they had not been credited. So I can't speak to the past, I can only speak to, what has happened under my dime, and moving forward, anybody who would go out on workers' comp would be paid through the insurance company,
Paid through the insurance company and not contributing to the pension plan.
and not contributing to the pension, no.
What do we do with short-term disability?
Short-term disability is paid directly through our insurance company, through AMPO.
Okay, but at least in the police collective bargaining agreement, it is clear it was negotiated to count towards credited service.
Correct.
Are we making sure that the contributions are coming in those cases?
Yes,
We are?
yes.
Okay, so the officers would write us a check, or we would withhold to make sure that that's done properly?
Correct.
Okay, so all right, good.
Do they sign a waiver if they don't want to contribute? So that way, when it come back at us in the situation?
We would probably not have any letter back from them saying to do it, but I don't know of anyone that hasn't done that.
So, just to be clear, Karen, so you're saying you've looked back to 2014, and anybody who's received workers' comp since 2014 has not contributed to the pension plan has not contributed a portion of those earnings to the pension
That is
plan?
correct.
Okay.
And I don't know when or why, but I was told that in 2014 it had stopped.
Mhm.
So when we had that one employee that had that issue, I wanted to, audit and be clear, that's what I was told.
Karen, talking.
And there was nothing taken out, or employees weren't allowed to contribute to the pension.
About how many employees are in that scenario from 2014?
I would say there was probably about maybe 8 that fell into that category. It was not a very long term, like Jeff's situation. It might have been a month or two.
Okay. I see a hand up. I promise I'll go back to public input, but I'd like to keep the dialogue going on the panel here, if that's okay. So, okay. Bruce?
Just one thing to add. I represent a number of municipalities in the state with respect to their pensions and workers' comp. I don't do workers' comp. But with respect to their pensions, it is highly unusual that a workers' comp carrier would send a check to the town, and the town would then pay out in wages. The norm was the workers' comp carrier just took it over and it was done. So, doesn't necessarily apply in this case, but just so you're aware of the normal rules.
but it does go back to 2008, so you may have had a carrier that obviously felt it was appropriate.
It's unusual.
Yeah.
I believe some of the checks were signed over. The injured employee received them and signed them over. And I've gathered this.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that it
I'm
never
so
came
such
directly
time.
to the town.
That's true, that's true.
So-
Okay.
Because we were bridging the receipt of the check,
Yes.
Right.
basically.
Okay.
Brian, did
So,
you have a
yeah,
question?
I did a lot of reading just to see if I could make sure that the most educated decision was made here. And one of the other areas that I just wanted to bring up that has been brought to my attention multiple times on page 21 of the contract, when it talks about funding and participant contributions, it talks about participants are required to contribute 6% of monthly earnings, and participant contributions are payable through payroll deduction or as otherwise determined by the town. And participant contribution will stop upon the earlier of two different things, and that's termination of employment and actual retirement. I know that that's an area that most union members, myself, have believed that that was kind of an area that covered those areas, that my contributions would cease upon termination or retirement. In this grievance situation, that hasn't happened.
He's out because of injury, not.
Yes.
Which would imply neither of these apply.
Yes. So there's been certain discussions about short-term disability, and it is specifically in the contract that you can contribute to your pension during short-term disability. And the question has been, well, why isn't it specific about workman's comp? And what I can gather is that, well, this section here is where people thought they were covered. My contributions would cease under two options, and obviously that there's some clarification issues here, or some people that don't think that's clear. But that is something that the police union and members have always stood by or stuck to.
If I may on that point, monthly earnings obviously is not defined in the collective bargaining agreement, but it is the term used in the ordinances for determining compensation, which is defined as W-2 compensation. And since workers' comp is not W-2 compensation, there were no monthly earnings. So therefore, you wouldn't get credited service during that period of time. There's nothing to contribute. It doesn't mean credited service stops. It just means you're not getting credit during that period of time.
But the contract is more recent than the ordinance.
But the contract uses the term monthly earnings,
Right.
which is defined in the ordinance and not otherwise defined in the collective bargaining agreement.
So it's another,
Another inconsistency, but it's referring.
Because in section, on page 19, we're talking about annual earnings.
Right, but here on
But here we're
on
talking
page
about
21,
monthly.
it says monthly earnings. You withhold 6% of monthly earnings, which is defined in the ordinance as W-2 compensation.
But we're all, okay, I see what you mean.
There was one other area that, during my research, I found a few other towns, New Canaan, State Police, Stratford, that seem to fall into areas like this. And it came into the areas of bargaining, collective bargaining. And one of the areas I just wanted to read was, this mutual obligation to bargain in good faith applies to those conditions of employment which are deemed mandatory subjects of bargaining. Here, the parties negotiated a settlement dealing with the conditions of employment. In this case, was Fairchelly's pension and recall rights. It was well settled that subjects concerning pension and retirement benefits are mandated subjects of bargaining. The reason I bring this up is, in this case, it talked about the city's retirement board is not a municipal employer and has no independent authority to negotiate settlement agreements. Furthermore, there is no language in the town charter which grants the retirement board independent authority to negotiate settlements or reject settlements negotiated by the city or its designated representatives. This was an area where, so I tried to look into what does our town charter apply, and some notes from back in the late 80s. It was clear that the police department found that the Suffield charter did not empower the retirement board to negotiate pension changes with the union. The only reason I bring that up is to make sure that whether or not we are the people that are supposed to make this decision. And it looked clear that this needed to be part of the collective bargaining agreement, and I wonder if that is why the union won an arbitration, that it needed to go through the proper grievance process. Because of some of these cases that they had, they determined that the retirement board was not the entity that could make those decisions.
So then that grievance is aimed to resolve that issue.
Yes. Now,
Can you repeat that language again? It sounded like it sounded to settle matters as opposed to interpret matters.
yes, it basically was describing that these things need to be negotiated through the collective bargaining agreement and not through a collective bargaining through And for our case, where it talks about how we file grievances, goes to the chief, the police commission.
Right,
the
but
town.
that's it, but I talked about, the language I heard you say was talking about settling a matter. The commission
Yes.
doesn't have the authority to settle a matter with respect to a collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
I would not disagree with that at all.
Okay, and
What I'm
that's-
saying is that, if there's a settlement outside of the retirement commission, that is not subject to the purview of the retirement commission. You can settle a matter between the town and an employee through a collective bargaining agreement. And that, I think, is what it's talking about. We're talking about settlement as opposed to interpretation of the plan. I think they're two different things.
Well, I think in the case of the police commission looking at this issue, they didn't look at any documents.
No.
They didn't even attempt to resolve it through the plan.
Right.
They asked for no counsel, no outside input for anybody. They just made a decision
And
based
they're
on their opinion.
And they're also not settling the case, which is what the language is that he was speaking of.
Right.
So we talked a few minutes ago about participant contributions, and Ryan pointed out that the only two things that end your participation or termination of employment or retirement. But then we've got the conflict with the definition of annual earnings. And annual earnings are defined as a participant's annual compensation for service to the town. So is it reasonable to say that if you're receiving workers' comp, that's compensation for service to the town? You were injured in service to the town. Is that compensation for that service?
I would not consider that compensation for service. It's compensation for not serving. You're on workers' compensation. First, you're not getting paid by the town. Okay, for the period. Secondly, it may relate to the fact that you worked for the town, but also other types of compensation are specifically excluded under the collective bargaining agreement for performing services for the town.
Well, I'm looking at that provision. So, I mean, it excludes outside duty bonuses and other forms of additional compensation.
Right. And I would consider this another form of additional compensation. Because the town isn't paying a salary during the period someone's on workers' comp.
Yeah, but doesn't a town purchase workman's comp insurance in order to provide an income for a person who works for them?
I'm not disagreeing with that, but it's not compensation paid by the town. It's paid for by the workers' compensation carrier. So therefore, how is that compensation under the terms of the plan?
I guess I
I guess
read
I go
this-
with other.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading this in other forms of additional. To me, that's a bucket.
Yeah.
It's a catch-all for, I don't know, nice neckties for doing something good for a neighbor, or a bottle of wine or something. I guess to me, additional compensation is not workman's comp.
Right, but if you look, annual compensation for service to the town should be paid by the town. That's where I'm coming from.
I understand, I just have a little problem with.
Where I have a problem with that is the workman's comp is because somebody has done service to the town and has been
Absolutely.
taken out because of that service. I mean, it's like saying a veteran who's deriving benefit for VA benefits. It's not compensation because they took a bullet. I mean,
Right. No, I don't disagree with you, but it's another ambiguity, it's a huge ambiguity in the plan, what that means.
Now, if we go through all our documents and get them all straightened out, we're not going to have this problem.
Correct.
Hopefully.
That's my hope.
All right. So can we or can we not decide what happens in this case?
We can, and that's, again, I want to see what it says under our current documents. I think we've proven that our current documents are pretty bad, and they're inconsistent, and they need to be addressed. The second issue is, how do we want to solve this particular case? And so we can do that as a side letter with the union. We can negotiate a settlement that would be non-precedent setting, and then we can move forward in addressing this once and for all so that we don't have these ambiguities. That's how I see this going, because we can continue to keep entering side letters with the unions, with the different unions, and sweeping the issues under the rug and spending legal fees and having our employees being uncertain as to what they're getting, or we can rip the Band-Aid off and fix it once and for all. And having a pension plan that's never been audited since the 60s is not appropriate. And so I think we all can agree on that.
Do it all.
I guess, next question. I've only been on this commission 8 years, and during that time period, we've never seen a buyback. Now, I know buybacks are something we haven't done in probably 10, 12, I don't know how many years. How many years have you been on? I guess the question is, how do you do a buyback? Number one, I guess in the case of this officer, we had him pay in for one of those 3 years.
So that's fine.
So that's easy.
That's easy.
There's no buy-in. It's just recognizing his service. The next 2 years, the question is, okay, we haven't had the money to invest.
Right.
So this officer's, if we just go and say, okay, you contribute whatever percentage it is of his salary in those 2 years, that's probably
doesn't
not
work.
adequate,
No.
because during the next preceding 10 years, this money would have been growing, and we haven't had the benefit of that growth.
Well, exactly, and that's exactly why I said that the police commission didn't adequately give us the remedy for the grievance, because those are the things exactly that you're pointing out. We have options here. Do we get the actuarial value of the contributions back to the date when they should have been made, or do we just give them the credited service and don't make them do that? These are decisions that are only the authority of the Retirement Commission, and it's very clear in our ordinance that only the Retirement Commission has the authority to authorize a buyback. So that's why we're here.
I think in the past, we've discussed this, that it had to be an actuarial
Yes.
contribution, because that's what the actual value of that buyback is.
And while it's going to be a healthy number,
Yes.
It's a healthy number based on a salary that was paid 10 years ago, and I'm sure there have been increases, salary increases, and if I'm not mistaken, under the contract, we take the 3 best years, which are going to probably be the 3 most recent. So even though it's going to be a good-sized check, it's
Yes.
still going to be more than beneficial to the
For the value of their defined benefit, yes.
because the benefits will well exceed that going forward.
So that's for this group to decide. What is the remedy here if we want to go that route, and how do we administer it?
I guess there's 2 aspects to this. One is, do you give credited service toward retirement recognition, but then do you give credited service pension with regard to after the buyback? Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yes, it does.
So in other words, I mean, I guess one of the questions is, you can retire at, how many years under the police contract? Is it 20?
20, 25?
20 or 25? 20.
25.
25.
25. So do the 3 years of workman's comp, two of which were paid by workman's compensation, do those go toward the 25 years of service under the contract currently?
Well, that's what we took away from them.
But that's what I'm
Right, and
getting
that's
at.
where we had the error, up until it was discovered.
But that's also an error relative to the pension, but also just toward his years of credited service to retirement as well. I mean, there's 2 factors here.
Right.
So, I mean, I feel like I know one is more monetary than the other. But years of service, I think, makes a difference too.
Yes.
It's a good question, but he only had, it's my understanding, 17.7 years, even if you count that period. So it doesn't have any real impact in
Not
this
right
case.
now.
Yeah, but I
It
agree.
does in- it
But
does
I
in
agree with you
7.5 years.
that it could be looked at it could be looked at 2 ways, for that purpose and for other purposes.
Yeah,
Agreed.
is it 4.5 years until his retirement, or is it 7.5 years till?
And up until this year, he believed he was getting his yearly pension paperwork to say 17.7 years, and all of a sudden it said 15.7, and when he's getting to this age in his career, I don't think that's a small amount at all.
I agree.
Although the CBA says credited capital C service, So I would say it's the interpretation, however you define credited service is credited service. It doesn't really vary.
It also says approved leave of absence. Workers' comp approved leave of absence.
On page 28. On page 28 of the collective bargaining agreement, seniority in the department is not affected by vacation time, temporary layoff, sick time, or any approved leave of absence or suspension. So that would apply for the workers' comp. So I think he has the 17 and change years of service from a seniority perspective. From his perspective, that doesn't matter a whole lot if 2 of those years aren't going towards the pension.
Understand.
Okay. I think, did you still have a question or a comment? Okay. You're welcome.
I guess I'd like to just, one of the areas I guess there was some confusion on is what that dispute resolution means or what it stands for. And he talks about the Retirement Commission shall be responsible for administration of the pension plan. To be honest with you, I don't really know very clearly what that means. But the part that just seems clear here is that any grievances or disputes with respect to the administration of benefits for police participants shall be processed through the grievance procedure in the police collective bargaining agreement. That happened. I think there's some disagreement on whether or not that was done appropriately by the police commission. And I wrote this down, so I'll read it. But it seems to me that if the police commission has to seek approval from the first selectman or retirement board every time the parties have resolved an employee grievance, that would render the grievance procedure meaningless. And it seems clear here that the right proper route was gone through. Whether the resolution by the police commission was correct or not, I don't know. I don't know if our decision here should have been more guidance to the police commission of how they should have gone. Should they have come to us for guidance? Do we have the right to make the decision in a matter that is clearly supposed to go through the grievance process, which we're not a part of? That's where my concern is as a retirement commission member, of whether or not we have the right to make this decision on something that seems like it's clearly supposed to go through the grievance procedure.
Well, if it goes through a grievance procedure, but they remedy it in a way that is contrary to how the pension plan is kept.
Absolutely.
And how the funds have grown over time and what is the value of the buyback.
Yep.
Then, they actually stated what is supposed to be done, but not even getting any advice on how that legally is usually done.
So should we be going back to them and telling them to correct that, or can we now supersede that decision? I guess that's our question.
That is a question. I don't have the answer for that, but I think that's some of the problem. Whether we agree or not agree, the remedy is not how we would normally have that done in anyone who was buying back.
Now, a few years back, we were all in a meeting when the education board came in here and said we just signed our contract, and somehow they allowed a bunch of the part-timers to join the union, and suddenly we realized that obligated the town to let a bunch of new union members join the pension plan, completely against, I believe, any wishes from the retirement commission.
Right.
And I don't believe we were able to stop it.
No.
I don't think we had anything that could say, no, you did this wrong. This was a collective bargaining agreement that we said that was a mistake. And
That's because their pension wasn't closed.
okay, well, so that's I've been on this 12 years, and that's where we haven't really made decisions in things like this before.
Well, we have, but always with the understanding that the buyback is actuarially calculated.
Yes, absolutely.
And whereas this, if that is the case, this is talking about pay at the time. And that's where we're, if we agree with this, we also have a fundamental problem with their remedy.
I agree.
So.
Or lack of.
Of the fact that that's not how someone makes their time whole in a pension.
Sure, okay.
And if I could just clarify, the Retirement Commission is not here tonight sitting as a step in the grievance process. Melissa Mack is step 3 in the grievance process and has chosen to incorporate the Retirement Commission into her decision-making process because it's the only way to adequately reconcile the 2 sentences in dispute resolution in the pension language. So
I guess that's where the confusion is in the grievance process. If it was sustained at some level, can you go past? Can you supersede it and go to the next level and go to this process? Even if mistakenly it was. sustain.
I would agree that the police commission has the authority to sustain a grievance. I would also submit that the police commission did not sustain this grievance
Okay.
in any reasonable application of that word, based on the meeting minutes.
Well,
Okay.
and again, if they sustained it, or whatever that word is, it came to the town. We have to administer it. Me, Karen, and Debbie. We don't know what to do
Right.
because they didn't give us a remedy. The only board in town that can decide how to do this is this board right here. I'm not going to decide in a vacuum. None of us are. This board has to tell us what to do here.
Okay.
And that's why we're here.
And it would be a different matter if the language in the police collective bargaining agreement and all the pension documents, et cetera, made sense. And that's why we're here tonight.
I just wanna make
There's
sure-
inconsistencies throughout understanding and applying language in the CBA versus language in the pension ordinance. And as Bruce mentioned earlier, you know, the collective bargaining agreement will override any inconsistent local law once it's approved. So, you know, this document is a binding document on the town. However, nobody knows what any of this means, consistent with, you know, the bigger picture. So, and that's really what the problem is.
Okay. So I think that's why we're here tonight, is to
Yes.
figure out, in our judgment, what it means,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Glenn, I want to make sure you have an opportunity if you have anything. No? Okay. Sure. Okay. So, I mean, does anybody have a suggested approach they'd like to consider or discuss?
I suggest we award this in favor of the police officer, and we figure out how to administer it. We do it as a side letter, so it's not precedent setting. We also look at the other people impacted, the 8 others, and we figure out what that means, and we afford them the same opportunity to be made whole, and that's outside of this grievance.
Oh,
And
wait a
then
minute, what 8 others? I thought that 8
From 2014 on, we could have others similarly.
prior.
Prior to 2000.
It's only prior. Once we made the decision in 2014, it's been administered correctly.
Well,
Okay.
correctly in that they're not contributing to the pension plan.
But they knew that right up front when they were getting the workman's comp?
I don't know what they know.
Okay.
Again, I know we don't want to talk about it today, but we have to audit our plan to see what
Oh,
we
yeah,
have done.
yeah,
and-
I know we
Yeah,
do,
yeah.
but I think we need to,
That's why we will address this as, I think, as a side letter in this case.
yeah.
We will make this officer whole, based on what we
Great.
think the documents should say, if they were done properly. And then we address it going forward. And with the police union, that is through the collective bargaining process, which we are currently engaged in. And so we can sit down with them and we can modify this contract to be clear. That's what my recommendation is, because I don't ever want to have this conversation again about this issue.
So to be clear, make whole would be to
Give him credited
grant him
service
credited service for the time in
and
question.
allow him to buy back based on the actuarial value of however that's calculated by Hooker
Right,
and Holcomb.
because the credited service comes along with making the contribution.
Correct.
Of the percentage of salary.
Correct. And it will be the same amount that anyone else would have had to pay, you know, at the time, considering, you know, the time, the actual value, the time value of money. Actuary, help me out here. Did I say that right?
It looked like in 2002, we did do something like that. I'd found some paperwork that showed the police officer, so I don't know if we've done anything since then, but in the paperwork I found, it showed like $7,800 for a police officer in 2002. Now we're years later, but it sounds like we had some studies that were done at the time. I don't know how difficult it is, or if you can use prior.
Our
to-
actuaries will
Okay,
calculate it
perfect.
based on the earnings that we've had every year. It's, yeah, it would be very different now, but it's.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially since, you know, this is something that happened 9 years ago. And until this year, everything that he would have received would have never raised any flags. So as soon as it raised a flag, now it became a question. And I think that, you know, in good faith, if nothing else, we should be crediting the time.
Yes.
The cost of what it will be, I think, has to be calculated by the professionals.
I agree with that.
And again, I don't want this to be one-offs every time somebody looks at their statement. We need to go forward,
Yeah.
audit the plan, make any corrections that need to be made, fix things, so that we can say with confidence that the annual statement you're getting from the town of Suffield is reliable.
Yes, I agree.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I've already discussed this with the Board of Finance. They're willing to, to help with some funding, and the pension plan will absorb some of the funding as well, and we'll figure it out.
Okay.
I guess the one other concern I have is that we make sure all our employees are aware of
Yes.
this 2014 change.
Correct.
Because I'm not sure everyone is.
Yes, I think communication throughout this entire process will be very important, and we will make sure it happens.
Okay. So I think it would be appropriate for us to put that in the form of a motion, but before I do that, Jeff, you're the one that this affects, and is there anything else you want to add at this point? No. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Sir, if I may ask, I'm Justin Fuller, I'm the union president I'm Justin Fuller from the police department, the union president. Just kind of more of a question than anything. Officer Reynolds here was supposed to be provided an opportunity to pay into the pension per the collective bargaining agreement. So, I believe that, his 6% of his earnings that year, our remedy in the grievance is that he would pay 6% of his earnings for both years that he, into the grievance. Now, is it typical on kind of a town error to then add in what, as far as investment wise, or what that money would be worth today if it was, I guess
Yeah.
it's more of a question than, because it's definitely not his error. He was being billed for his insurance, and he was assuming since he was being billed for his insurance, he's being billed, for his contributions or whatnot. It was completely, he was completely unaware all the way up until just recently when he got notified, hey, you didn't contribute for those 2 years. So who's responsible for that additional money? So that's just my question, if you can answer or not.
I'm a mathematician. I think what it would be good is, let's get the actuarial numbers and take a look.
Let's look
And
at it.
see what number comes back. And then go from there. I guess that would be my next. I feel like mathematically the money wasn't there. I understand there was error, but it seems like there was error on both parties. Clearly it sounds like the town made a mistake. Well, more importantly, the town had a course of dealing in year one, which they then changed and went to the payment of the deferred comp. The individual receiving workers' comp, receiving workers' comp directly.
I don't know anything about year one. I know about
Well, we just heard about it.
2008 to 2010, but that's what our grievance is about. We're not.
Yeah, but we also have to look at how we handled it the first year. In the first year, we were withholding money.
Yeah. The first year was, it's whole, it's whole right now.
Good.
Yeah,
right
the
now.
first year is fine.
But that's not, and there's no issue in the grievance on that first
Yeah,
year.
it's just 2008 to 2010 are the dates that are on
Yeah.
the grievance.
But all I'm getting at is there was a change in course of dealing, and the individual started to receive compensation from the insurance company, and payments weren't being made through the town, so
Yeah, and
some payment needed to come to the town from the individual.
yeah, but the town has to provide that. When I go out on short-term disability, the town says, hey, look, if you want that time to count towards your
Yeah.
pension, you got to pay X amount of dollars.
We know
The town never did that. 10 years later, they're coming to him saying, hey, you didn't pay that contribution, and now we're going to tack on what the interest that the town would have gotten on that money for the past 10 years. Is he really responsible for that, or should he be? That's all. This is my question here. It's not. I'm not. Again, I appreciate you guys all being here and looking at it from an open mind. But I think that's also something else that needs to be looked at.
Well, I think that would be a negotiable resolution. We need to know in the first place, though, what the 6% of his 10-year-old wages would be, and then what the actuarial difference would be before we can take that next step.
Well, it's clear that we're not conceding that the documents said that he was entitled to make those contributions to begin with. We're saying that there's problems with the documents. We all agree that. We're saying, at least I'm saying fundamentally, that I think that this should count. And so we're saying we're going to address it. And so somewhere in between there is the fair number to pay.
Correct.
Okay. So, does somebody want to make a motion? Get it on the table?
Not sure how to word the motion.
Would the motion be to perform the actuarial's calculations on it?
It sounds like we're going to credit the years of service no matter what.
Yes.
So I think that's the first part. And then the second part is the calculation of the actual value and where you go from there.
So is it,
For the individual Jeff Reynolds?
Correct.
so is it providing the credited service contingent on a resolution of the buyback amount?
No, I don't think so.
But there's got to be,
Yeah, I think that's negotiated then. If we know what it is, we know what both numbers are, but I think theoretically, the years, I think, should be credited.
Here's a suggestion, that it's credit the credited service for those 2 years, contingent upon payment of such amounts as shall ultimately be determined by the town, based on taking into consideration the actuarial value of the cost. That doesn't mean that's the number you're going to charge, but you'll take that into consideration. And if the town wants to negotiate a different number, that's their choice.
Okay.
I like that. Okay. Did somebody get that down? Somebody want to make that in the form of a motion?
I'll
So
mirror
moved.
his comment in the form of a motion.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Were you able to capture that? I'm making the motion, Chris.
Not what he said.
But I'm making his motion. I'm
We'll see
I'm
where we
using his wording. Thank you.
So that will not be negotiated with us, that will be negotiated with Officer Reynolds and the town?
Yes.
Yeah.
As far as, we agree that the town needs to go, he'll be allowed to buy the years back, and needs to be negotiated as far as whether he had any
Negotiated
liability
with
on
the
it.
union.
Yeah, we're
as
going
a side
we're going to
letter.
get both numbers, and then there'll be a negotiation.
Okay.
And this will be part of a side letter that will not be precedent-setting, our same kind of standard way we do this.
And we'll resolve the group.
And we'll resolve the grievance in its entirely.
Do we, this one is specific to
To Officer Reynolds.
Officer Reynolds.
Correct.
but
Just.
You've mentioned 8.
Yes, then we're going to audit the plan, and we're going to figure out what else is out there that's inconsistent, and we're going to fix it.
And then you'll bring that back
And we're
here,
I'm going to
and
come
we'll
back, you're going to
handle
be
it in a
sick of me bringing this to you.
consistent
And then we're going to amend and restate the plan and do everything that Mr. Barth recommended. We're going to file the documents in the town clerk's office and everywhere else. As you see from the summary, we don't have anything signed, God knows, even Hooker and Holcomb has been administering an unsigned document. We're going to fix all this.
that we know of. Don't know of.
There could be 7 other boxes in the basement of Town Hall that we haven't found yet, but it has the golden egg, the signed document.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for, but yes.
By the way, those 8 other individuals are not all police,
Correct.
just so we know.
Yes, yes.
The individuals are employees that are prior to 2014.
Okay.
I don't know who or how many.
We're going to look at all of it.
2014, so I don't know how many are prior to 2014. That needs to be audited.
So we really have to audit what the years of service are
All of it.
credited to the pension for everyone.
Correct.
In order to find out if there's any discrepancies between what is credited and what we've been telling them.
Yes.
That is correct. I think the right way is to go back and audit all of our current employees to see if this affected anyone else.
Okay?
Yeah, I mean, that's on this particular issue.
Issue,
We know
yeah.
that there are gaps for a variety of reasons
Just on this.
that have essentially been resolved, and we've said, yeah, those issues are behind us.
Correct.
That is correct.
Yes. Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Back to the agenda.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so,
Minutes and things.
yes, so we do have a few other items on the agenda, but I would say if, maybe we could take a short break, and if people wanted to not stick around for the rest of the meeting, we wouldn't be offended. So. Thank you, everybody.
There. What are you going to do? I know. That doesn't mean that it was done right. No, it doesn't mean that the gears are right. We have too many things that are wrong. Let's just make it as it is. Let's clean it up as best we can.
Yes, yes.
I mean, that also means that we just make it
Oh, thank you, Bruce. Yes, unfortunately, I'd like to say unfortunately, but yes, but we need your help, so, yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, from this.
Very excited.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Yes, we
All
will.
right, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Actually, you too.
All right.
Yeah, you can if you want. You can just sit there. You can put all your stuff
Okay,
down
so the,
there. I was gonna ask a question on something, so
we need to approve the minutes of the August 8th meeting. Did people have a chance to review those?
Yep.
Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Is there a second?
I actually did have a comment or two,
Oh,
but I will
did you?
do it after the second. Do I second and
Yes.
then make comment?
Okay.
I'll second, and then, my only comment was on, I've got so many papers here.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's not the right copy. There's one at home.
Be clear to them.
Sorry, guys. Oh, here they are. It would be the second to the last page, top paragraph. There's just some redundancy. It's, the paragraph starts, Mr. Lepore replied that Prudential will hold the securities. Prudential will trade the underlying securities and Times Square will call in the trades, but Prudential is executing them. He clarified this is not a model-driven strategy with Times Square gives, where Times Square gives their buy list. The next two sentences, I think, should be eliminated, or three sentences. They will call in the trades, Prudential will execute the trades, their instructions will be buying and selling the strategy. It's somewhat redundant and confusing, so I think if we can strike those three sentences, it would be cleaner.
Okay.
Otherwise, great minutes. I can't believe you kept it all straight.
Yeah, that's
Great.
really thorough, really thorough.
Okay, so do you have that change, Carrie? Yep, okay. Any other comments? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Debbie, status of the actuarial valuation.
It is in process, and I hope to have the rest of the information from the Board of Ed so that we can send it in the end of this week or early next week.
So the town, you have the information
Our
for the town
information
side?
is,
You're done.
Okay, all right,
but it doesn't make sense to send half the document to the actuaries.
sure. Okay. So we would then discuss that at the February meeting?
Yeah.
So they'll come to the February meeting to present?
I will check with them, yes.
Okay.
Well, we need it by then because
Budget,
we got budget.
We have to budget,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah. Board of Ed
Budget.
asked me
It's even late.
when they would get the budget money, and I said, when you provide me with the information. I sent it to them October 15th or 14th or something, so.
Okay. Well, even if we don't approve it, Hooker and Holcomb should be able to give you some
Budget numbers,
indication
yes.
in advance, right?
Yes.
Okay.
At least at that point for the budget.
Close. Yeah,
February
and it should
13th.
be going down because it's closed. I mean,
The plan is
yeah,
closed.
the plan
yeah.
is closed.
It's on my calendar.
I'm trying,
Right.
I can't remember what it was. I can't remember the last 2 years.
Yeah. Well, in theory, but we're not contributing as much as we should,
Right.
so. Okay. We're contributing what we've
they
agreed to
tell-
contribute,
what
but,
they tell us to contribute.
yes. Right. But I would make the argument that we've probably leaned on the side of lower contributions to help the budget than what we should probably be making, so. Anyway.
Although we've made it every time.
I don't-
We've made them every
No,
time.
we've made what
I
we've
don't-
agreed
I
to,
don't-
but I think
sway
we've,
them at all to say your lower numbers.
yeah, but I think we've purposely made some adjustments to the
Correct.
the methodology
But I don't
to
think
lower
that's-
the amount.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't think the amortization, I don't think that's unusual with any
Mhm.
plan.
Right. Okay.
Right, Glenn?
What were you saying about the
The
amortization?
amortization and making those changes is I think it's standard practice in,
I know, at least on the corporate world, it's standard with respect to how you amortize. So I'm not so sure on the public side.
Well, we'll.
It's a
talk
question
to
we can
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
them, right? We can have them confirm it.
Okay. I skipped over the 2020 meeting schedule, which Carrie put together. Did that go to everybody?
Yes.
I think so.
Did anybody, I think Thursdays are good for you, Jack? Yeah, okay. The only issue, I know I will not be here for the February meeting, but I wouldn't change the meeting date based on that, so. So we'll have Carrie, I don't think we need to, do we need a motion to approve it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the proposed meeting
I will
schedule?
move that we accept the dates as presented.
Okay, is there, I'll second that.
I would second that, because I'm not going to do any more of them after this.
maybe you could do Kate's place.
So, okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Melissa, I think we've talked about it. Your wish, and I think we're in general agreement that we certainly need to tighten up the administration of the plan
Yeah.
and codify the plan documents. I mean, I think an RFP would seem
Yes.
to be appropriate.
Yes, and so the RFP would cover, getting a third party to come in and audit, independent, so not Hooker and Holcomb, to come in and audit the plan. Bruce Barth has already given us some recommendations based on language that needs to change based on tax law changes, et cetera, pension law changes, and things that are inconsistent. I envision bringing you all of that over the course of the next year to consider and to recommend. And then the things that we have to negotiate through collective bargaining, we will do so. And the things, that we can, and then we'll take it to town meeting, we'll follow the process as it's set out, and then we'll hopefully end up with instruments that we all understand and know where they are, and they're signed and they're filed, and we can follow.
So do we need to approve an RFP, or can you do that?
I think you should. I think you should make a motion to authorize me to do it, because the funding for it will come out of the pension plan.
It'll come on.
It'll come out of the pension plan. It will impact our annual contribution to the pension plan, but I think it would make sense to authorize that.
Okay. So,
Well, wait a second. Let's clarify this. What fiscal year are we talking about? Are we going to actually take money out of the plan to pay for this, or are we going to reduce the contribution next year?
They will be administrative expenses of the plan.
Okay.
Okay.
Coming out of the plan.
Coming out of
if
the
it's in this
plan.
fiscal year.
Correct. They will
Okay.
be administrative expenses of the plan that will be taken out of the plan. Obviously, it will impact our long-term obligation, and it'll be, impacted in our fund.
Smoothed out
It'll
over
smooth
the
out,
over
exactly.
time.
I just want to make sure that.
I don't expect it to be so
expensive.
expensive that we have too much smoothing to do, because, I will negotiate, I'll make sure, that's the
Should be.
RFP process will.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
What year we were talking and how it was coming. Okay.
so, but I think an audit is a specific term. I mean, that's engaging an auditor to engage or to opine on the financial statements of the plan. I'm not sure that's what you're asking for.
I want them to audit the way we have administered the plan. So if is there a different way to say that?
Oh, it's
I
Not
want
a, not a financial statement.
Oh, yeah,
That's
that's
not
No,
a
no,
different.
no, no. I want
Right.
them to audit the administration of the plan. I want them to take our documents as inconsistent as they are, and look at the things that we should have been doing, make sure that, when we had short-term disability, we were crediting.
That's kind of what Bruce has already started.
He
right?
has started some of it, but I think that I think a third-party auditor,
So is this done by a law firm, or is this done?
I think it's done by a Hooker and Holcomb-ish kind of place of,
Well,
Well,
But they're
I mean,
more
they're-
actuarial.
yeah, there's the legal side, and then there's reviewing our data to make sure that,
will you tell me, who do we need? I know it's not our auditors that we've used, because they say that they haven't even done a sampling to check to make sure that in any given time that we've administered it properly. Who should we have come in and look to make sure that we've administered this properly? I was thinking it should be someone actuarial, so it would be one of those, Milliman or one of those other corporations that do this type of thing, but I defer to you. Who should do this? An accounting firm?
You've got components that are somewhat different. I'm wondering if you really can find someone who can do all the pieces in any one firm.
Well, I know there's like Angel Pensions out of Rhode Island that has done work for another pension plan that I was involved with. And, they'll do the actuarial work, but they'll also dive into the, what's behind the
plan
numbers.
documents and.
Yeah.
Mhm. I just want to be able to say to those employees, we checked it out and you're good. We've done it right.
So you're more concerned not with, well, you're concerned with to make sure that everybody's getting the proper number of years of service,
Yes.
that they're getting the actual number of,
Contributions.
credits, contributions, all that kind of
Yes.
thing.
see, those to me sound like two different things. What
Yes.
Bruce was talking about was codifying the plan documents.
Yes.
And coming up with a new
Right.
plan document.
And that was more
That's,
of a,
that's looking
that's one
forward.
thing.
and that was more of a legal issue, I thought,
Yeah.
than anything.
But now we've got a couple of different collective bargaining agreements going back to the arbitration award. We've got the pension document that we think is the operative document. We've got a plan document out there that's unsigned. What have we
Well,
been
we don't
using?
know, but
We
we
don't
can't
know.
find
Yeah,
it.
we can't seem to find the signed copy. What, I want to be able to give this pile of stuff to someone to say, at least for our active employees that haven't retired yet, have we been doing what we were supposed to be doing under these documents as they exist?
Well, we know the answer is no.
We know the answer is no. So I want to know, what do we need to do to fix them?
Well,
It's
I
gonna
also wanna
cost us
know what the
something.
Well, to
legal-
fix-
And
not to
also
fix
what the
the doc-
ramifications, what the
Yeah.
expense
Yes,
ramifications.
exactly.
And not to
exactly.
fix the documents, but to fix
No,
the
no,
people.
no, to fix the people, to
Yeah.
fix
So
the people.
that's
Yes,
kind of two
yes.
different things,
To
and-
fix the
and that's
people,
why I'm
to
saying
get us
it's
to
not-
today, and then to fix the documents going forward, so that we are doing what we were supposed to do. If it requires negotiation with the unions, we will address it. If it requires a settlement with the different unions, excuse me, that my back is to you.
No, no
We
worries.
will do that, but we have to do this once and for
Right.
all.
So-
Or we're going to spending good money after bad on lawyers in this kind of crazy.
So when you're talking about an audit, you're talking about an audit of how we executed what we have.
Correct.
And where I think our first reaction, when you said an audit of the pension, was a financial audit.
Got it, okay.
Okay?
So I don't know if there's any value in doing a financial audit, that's up to you to tell us, but I think I'm looking for an administrative
You're
audit.
administrative.
Well, I
Yes.
guess the question
I left the word
is
out.
I don't know, but I would think a financial audit of a pension would have to get into the
Well, wouldn't it?
administrative.
I would think so.
Because it's gonna have to, I mean, I don't
We'll have to
know.
validate the actuarial valuation, right?
Yeah.
Which is what all that,
Goes into.
But, I mean, I guess the other, you haven't even mentioned, and it came up tonight, ordinances. We have ordinances that don't even tie in with,
Nope.
Right.
you haven't mentioned ordinances.
Yeah,
So,
that's
and you're
the
rewriting the
legal-
ordinance book right now, aren't you?
Yes, and the ordinance the pension ordinance that is, the one we've been using is the one that's in the book.
right? So
Okay.
what Bruce recommended was we repeal everything that's out there and we adopt a new ordinance.
Yeah, so we have to think about his recommendations and what
Yeah.
we want to do for Suffield, but, in the immediate, once we do the whole code of ordinances, this ordinance is going to be in place. But it doesn't mean we can't amend it going forward.
I'm not comfortable voting on an audit until we know how we define it
Yeah.
and how
Okay.
we're gonna RFP it.
Sure.
I think we need
Well,
to
then-
flesh
So
that
I
Well,
out.
would
let's-
ask, flush that out, and then let's
Okay.
have a special meeting if we
Yeah.
have to.
Great, that's fine. I wanted to start this discussion.
RFPs online. mean.
Yeah.
see what you
Exactly,
can
'cause I
find.
think you need to find an RFP.
Exactly.
RFP
I don't know what
concept.
we need to do, but I know we need to do something, so,
Fast.
yeah,
So
okay,
agreed.
and quick to get it over with, so,
Well,
okay.
and I guess the other question is the work Bruce does,
Yes,
in terms of redoing the pension and all of that, that's probably paid for, this clearly can be paid for by, I think, the pension.
yes.
The other, is that paid for by the town, or is that paid for by the pension? You know,
Which
in
part?
other words, a rewriting of the whole pension plan and everything, where's that get covered?
I mean, at the end of the day, if it
It's
comes
the
out of
same-
the plan and you just raise the contribution you have to
Exactly, it's
ultimately
be-
make, so I don't know that it matters.
If you
It's
can
on-
do it out of the plan, I think we should do it out of the plan, because you can pay for it over time.
Right,
It's less painful.
yeah, I mean, I can tell you right now, my legal fees budget can't, and my
No, I
contracted
understand.
services wouldn't be able to absorb all this, so it does make sense, I think, to get it right and to charge it to the plan, but we can talk about that further.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
All right, so I don't think there's any action for us
Okay.
to take on that tonight.
Nope, we'll continue the discussion, thank you. We'll get our act together.
So unless I've missed something, I think that covers the agenda.
I don't have any that don't have a line through it.
Okay.
I
So is there,
move we adjourn.
all right, is there a second?
I second.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Glenn, congratulations on the win.
Yeah, I'm late to my first meeting.
Oh, you are? By big-
I think we got,
Tell Sue Davis I'm really sorry.
That's really funny.
yeah.
Are you gonna continue?